Howdy folks, welcome back to Duke Frazier Productions. In today's video, we're going to talk about how black powder firearms were carried way back in 1850s, 60s, and 70s. Stay tuned. Alright folks, so the topic of today's video is how these black powder firearms were carried back in the 1850s through the 1870s. The idea for this video stemmed from a poll that I did on the Black Powder Revolver Enthusiast page. One of the ideas that was created and voted upon was the carrying, cleaning, maintenance, use, etc. of black powder firearms in the 1860s. So I decided to make this video covering a little wider range, 1850s through the 1870s, and we're going to limit it just to the carrying. We'll do the other parts in separate videos. So with that said, let's get started. So the first holster we're going to take a look at today is the Slim Jim. This was a very popular holster and a very simple holster. It's just a piece of leather sewn around to hold the gun, and then another piece of leather sewn on for a belt loop. The Slim Jim holster does provide a lot of versatility in the manner in which you can carry a black powder gun. You can have it normal style, straight up and down on your hip. You can carry it cross draw fashion, or you can have it butt forward on the strong side. The one downside to this holster that I really don't care for is the fact that the belt loop is sewn on separate. Because I found that after prolonged wear and tear, those belt loops tend to pull off of the holster. And that's why later on holsters were developed in a manner in which the belt loop was all in the same big piece of leather that the main body of the holster was made from. And unfortunately, I don't have any holsters like that for us to look at today. So the first method we'll look at carrying with the Slim Jim is in the cross draw fashion. And you see that the gun is very easily accessible in the butt forward position. Now butt forward is a lot easier to get a hold of the gun when riding on a horse. Whereas if you put the holster in the upright like I just did there, getting on the horse ain't so easy. So as we move a little bit further away, you notice that this is a very quick and easy draw to make. My body moves very little when I make this, making it quick and easy to do. So another common way of carrying with a Slim Jim is butt forward. So this is a fairly safe draw to make if you pay attention to what you're doing. The only difference between this and coming up out of the holster regularly is that you have to turn the gun over. Because you'll notice here when I slow things down, the muzzle comes out and away, never crosses my body. So this is a little bit further out, but you notice when I draw the gun that my shoulder doesn't have to rise up very much as compared to coming straight up. That makes this draw much more comfortable to do. So the last method I want to discuss on how these guns were carried with the Slim Jims is a straight up and down method. Now this is a very common method as well. However, for me it's not very comfortable. I don't like it all that much. And that's because I have to lift my shoulder so high to get the gun out of the holster. It's not very quick, it's not very comfortable with a gun that has an 8-inch barrel like this one does. Now when you go to a shorter barrel gun like this old junker brass frame gun that I have, it does get a little bit easier to draw, but then again, straight up and down, you still have to lift your shoulder a little bit to get it out of the holster. So the next holster we're going to take a look at here is the military style flap holster. Now this one's very similar to the Slim Jim. The only difference is that this has a flap to secure the gun. Now this type of holster would be common with cavalry, officers, artillery, etc. And the flap helps keep the gun in the holster, because in combat you might be bouncing around a bit and you don't want to lose your sidearm. So drawing from this type of military holster is no different than the butt forward method that we showed earlier, other than you've got a flap that you have to get out of the way. Now, why the military adopted this, one reason was that the saber was carried on the left-hand side to be drawn by the right, and so the pistol had to be put on to the right side and carried butt forward, so that it was easier to draw. And also, if you're cavalry, it's a lot easier to carry it butt forward because it doesn't get in the way of your leg when you're trying to mount and dismount a horse. Now, the safe way to return this to the holster is to let the muzzle drop to the ground, rotate it in your hand, and then slide it back into the holster. That way you're not sweeping yourself trying to put it back in. Now, for the bigger guns, such as the Walker and the Dragoons, a lot of times these guns were carried in holsters that were mounted on saddles, pommel holsters. However, it was not uncommon to see them carried on a belt in similar fashion to what we've seen here in the video thus far. Now, one thing about carrying these big revolvers like this is that they're heavy. They're almost too heavy to be carried on a belt. I've carried my Walker on a holster that I made for it on a belt, and I found that after about an hour or so of carrying it, no matter how tight you get that belt, it tries to get down around low around your hips just from the weight of it. Now, sometimes carrying these revolvers didn't involve a holster at all. Wild Bill Hickok was known to tuck his into a sash, and I've seen records saying that they were tucked into belts and into chaps, so we'll take a look at that as well. So in the early days of the cowboy period, 1860s and in through the 1870s, you could see cowboys carrying these guns in their chaps, because these were designed to give you a little bit of protection, but you could store your money in the pockets and you could stick your gun in the chaps like I have done here. And it actually makes a pretty nice holster. It's very comfortable to carry, and it's no different than the cross draw setup. So in the belt or in the sash was also a common way of carrying these guns, and it's a very, very simple method of carrying. Just like with the cross draw, it's pretty easy to do once your belt cooperates, that is. The downside to doing this method, as well as with the chaps, is that the revolver doesn't have that much protection. You notice a lot of the barrel's exposed, cylinders exposed, hammer and the trigger are exposed. Whereas with the Slim Jims, all those pieces are carried and it's offered a little bit more protection. So this little audacious display is to bring us to our next point, and that is methods that aren't exactly historically right. So this rig that I'm wearing here is a drop leg style. I've got a drop leg holster on a regular cartridge belt. This is from the 1950s era. I've never seen a holster set up like this anywhere in the Old West. It was not common, not usual. So this came about with the myth of the gunfighter, which originated, I'd have to say, about the Roy Rogers era when they're doing the quick draw and that such, and it just got worse through the 1950s and then on. It seems like in a lot of the great westerns of the 1950s, 60s, and even the 70s, all the guys were carrying this kind of belt and holster rig, something similar. Kirk Douglas, John Wayne, he didn't have the drop leg style. His was actually a little bit more traditional, but it seems like all the gunfighters, either the good guys or the bad guys, have this kind of drop leg, and they just didn't really exist. And here's another example of those really bad drop legs. This one is my uncle's holster that he's adapted for his 1860 revolver, so that's what I'm using here on it. And it's the typical drop leg, tie it down on the leg, real loose. When all practicality, this thing is about worthless except for making you look all fancy, basically like a dude ready to go to town. It flops around on your leg a lot. You know, if you was riding a horse, the gun would beat you to death before you could ever use the thing.
Alright folks, so that's going to take care of it today for the video on carrying the black powder firearms traditionally. If you've liked what you see in the video thus far, be sure to hit the subscribe button below. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook as well. You can find that at www.facebook.com/Duke Frazier Productions. Also, we have a Patreon page. You can find that at www.patreon.com/Duke Frazier Productions. Head on over, check it out, maybe think about giving us something to help keep the channel going. Be sure to stay tuned and keep your powder dry.